everyone, and welcome to our knowledge transfer series. We're working on a 3-bucket retirement system right now, and this is the last bucket, the protection bucket. And I actually think this is a pretty underrated bucket, and I think this is the one if we're trying to relate it to the more qualitative side of retirement, i.e. the happiness quotient retirement. I think this one's actually really important to get right and understand how this doesn't just protect you financially, but emotionally as well. Once again, my name is John Erickson. I have over 17 years in the financial services industry. I've worked everywhere from an insurance company, inside a bank, as well as running my own financial planning practice for years at this point. I'm based here in Washington State in Bellevue, Washington, right next to Overlake Hospital, and I'm a graduate of Washington State University. So if you ever want to drop me a Go Cougs sometime, I'd really appreciate it. As I always mention in these presentations, this is general information. You know, if we talk to 100 different people and I give everyone the same, what I would consider really good advice, there's always going to be 1 or 2 people that doesn't apply to. So please treat today's presentation as general in nature. All right, a protection bucket. What are we going to talk about today? Well, we need to understand some of the problems with protecting money in the financial services industry, right? Because there are some problems with protecting money. Who would think that there's a problem with, taking a dollar and making sure it's really protected and rock solid. And then we talk about how you put a model into practice, how you choose some different protection buckets, some theories. And then we're going to talk about the topic of guaranteeing versus not guaranteeing, because I think this is actually a really important consideration for retirees on either side of this equation. And then we're talking about how we handle this in our practice. So let's talk about what is a protection bucket in retirement. And we have to talk about some basic problems and what we're trying to do, right? So one of the first problems with the protection bucket is, what are we protecting from? There are some people in whose financial situations, they don't actually need a protection bucket. They don't technically need to protect themselves from, say, a market downturn based upon their overall situation. But most people, when we talk about protection bucket, is all about dealing with the reality that most of us are going to have 1 to 2 market downturns during our retirement or more. And these downturns last 15 months or so. And I think there's actually a second problem to this concept right here. It's not frequent that you're going to experience a market downturn in retirement, usually. You can't guarantee that, but it's not very frequent usually. But you will be consistently bombarded with the worries that a market downturn can occur. So I think there's 2 components here that you have to consider. One is you have to have a mathematical reason, or when I say quantitative reason, to protect yourself from a market downturn for at least potentially 15 months. But then you also have to have an emotional reason to do it, i.e., you're no longer working, you're going to pay more and more attention to your money, and I always say this is your sleep at night component. The market's going to go down someday for most of us. Are you able to sleep at night? And then there's a second problem is what does protection even mean? When we talk about protecting money, and we're trying, where are we protecting it from? We also need to talk about how we're protecting it, because what I'm showing on the slide right here are 3 different ways that in the financial services industry, I could come to you and say, I am protecting you. First is a Vanguard Life Strategy. It's a conservative investment allocation that has a risk score of 17 out of 100. That's a very low risk score. You can see over 5 and 10 years, it has pretty low returns. And even in the last 3 years, it has negative returns. But this would have low volatility. So this first one, I think, really illuminates one of the big problems we have in the financial services industry, that you don't understand what protection may necessarily mean. Because we can compare this to the second one, which is a CD. Doesn't go down in value, earns 5% in this example. Or even a money market fund, or an account in this case, typically doesn't go down in value, or is around 5%. And there's all these 3 different ways to protect people. And if we put more of your money way on the left-hand side, the income strategy, which would correlate with like bond strategies or target date funds, you may be statistically protected, but it may not meet the emotional needs you have in retirement of seeing your money not go down in value, right? And so you have to have this conversation of, what does protection mean to you, not just mathematically, but emotionally. And just understanding the difference here between these different options is a good conversation for you to have yourself of what do you expect. And then this slide right here is why I have a problem with target date funds a lot of times. It's not that they're bad, it's that they don't do a good job of explaining to retirees how they're protecting you exactly. They're just kind of trying to do it. And really what they're doing is they're doing the slide on the left. And if you're the type of person who wants to be conservative and doesn't want to see your money go down, Well, there's a problem when you statistically protect money, but you don't have a structural guarantee in place. And in general, when we talk about protection bucket, I think this is true for most investing. You get to pick two of these three things, but you don't normally get to pick all three, right? So you normally get to pick something that has good potential returns, something that is very liquid, you can get the money whenever you want, and something that doesn't move around very much or is safer, so to speak. And you only get to usually pick a couple of these components, but not all three. And when we talk about protection bucket, if you want to see good returns, like say 5%, you might be buying a CD. CDs aren't liquid. You have to break them to access the value. And they're going to be less volatile, of course. And so you see with that just basic concept of I'm going to buy a CD, you're automatically picking 2 out of the 3 here. And this concept of can you get out the money when you need it, liquidity. I really look at protection buckets as someone needs money on a Tuesday at 1 o'clock, and where are we going to get it from? What's the best way to grab it in retirement? Now, I'm a financial planner, and I'm trying to manage retirees' overall retirement plans. And I have a slightly different duty on myself than you would have on yourself, because you might be like, well, I don't have to worry about Tuesday. I'm okay waiting until Thursday or Friday. But I never know when a client's going to come to me and say, well, I want money at Tuesday at 1 o'clock. And when you look at these two options right here, you would say, well, the CD appears to be better. It's a 5% CD. But the Life Strategy Fund, you can sell any time for its market value, and it's pretty liquid immediately with its returns intact if they're there. Whereas the CD, you got to break it. And if you're buying a brokered CD, which I'm seeing done a lot, like a Fidelity as an example, you could even take market losses breaking your CD. And so liquidity is actually a really important concept when we talk about protection bucket. This is why we do talk about laddering. But liquidity is one in the back of my mind that is a critical thing for you to consider as part of the strategy. And then the last problem is inflation. Protection buckets are usually terrible against inflation. When we look at the CPI averages versus interest rates right now, long-term averages, yeah, it looks like the interest rates right now are beating it. But you look at actually what inflation has been doing in recent history, your money's not really keeping pace over the last 3 years with the really good interest rates I would say we have right now. And so one of the issues with protecting money is typically inflation erodes it, especially if you spend any of this. So the reason I treat this as an income bucket is because what I'm really considering here is that, if we start taking this money for income, I'm going to start having inflation erosion. So I'm not looking at this as a consistent income play. I'm looking at this as I need a chunk of money when I need it. And then what is your process? Right, how are you going to figure out what a protection bucket means to you? And I think there's really two components. There's math and there's emotion. And if I was to suggest a process to you, I would always start with, what do you expect to make? And then go to the emotional side of, is that guaranteed, or is there some level of risk, or is there some level of volatility? And then liquidity. Don't forget about liquidity. Inflation is a big overall concept you have to consider. And then, things can fail. You should always have a basic idea of how something fails. So this is our process we would suggest you go through as you create your own protection bucket. Now let's put this process into practice. Let's kind of look at 3 different very common options to protect money. First is a CD. You can buy brokered CDs. You can buy them directly from a bank. And they're pretty simple. They're what you see is what you get. You'll see a total return on there, like say 5%. The bank guarantees to pay that. It's a guarantee. It's a structural guarantee with FDIC insurance behind it. All right. Most of the time, you got to always check on that. It's not volatile. It's actually technically not liquid. Now you say, well, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with breaking a CD and losing the interest, or even taking small losses if it's a brokered CD, and that's fine. But it isn't liquid. And like in my practice, that would be something I would worry about, like, can I do that better? But you don't necessarily have to do that better. You can always say, this is good enough. How does it stand up to inflation? I would say typically a CD just keeps pace with inflation. It doesn't necessarily beat it, doesn't necessarily lose it. And then, CDs, banks can fail. Not very often, but they do. That's why you have to watch out for things like FDIC insurance. Okay, another type of an option, a multi-year guaranteed annuity. And that's typically sold by an insurance company, right? And it looks actually very similar to CD, but it's not FDIC insured. The guarantees are from an insurance company. So you see the similar total return, 5%. It's now guaranteed by the insurance company, not a bank. Once again, not volatile in this example. Liquidity. I would say this is less liquid and more liquid in the CD, both sides of the equation. Because on one side, if you take all the money out, you're going to have a big penalty. On the other side, most of these annuities have what's called a free withdrawal feature, like 10%, which can actually be significant liquidity. So I think of it on both sides of the equation. How does this stand pace with inflation? Pretty similar to CD. It's just going to generally keep pace. And once again, how could this fail? You're usually talking now insurance company failure or you having a big early surrender penalty. And then we kind of go back to this Vanguard Life Strategy fund, which is very similar to, say, a bond fund or any sort of conservative asset strategy. Once again, we see the total return is pretty low right now. Now, there was a time a decade ago, where the returns actually looked pretty good. But right now, the returns look very poor, especially in recent history. And that's where we get to this concept. Is there a guarantee? No. What you're getting here is lower standard deviation, and if certain market conditions turn around, you actually might get better returns than, say, a CD. This is very liquid. It's a mutual fund. You can get your money at the end of the day, plus a trading period time. Pretty simple. How does it stand up to inflation? Well, I would argue this one's very poor, at least in recency bias. And how could this fail? Well, now that we're talking market risk, we're talking this could be failing you emotionally. This could be failing you. It's just not actually keeping pace with inflation if you look at it. Maybe you allocated too much money to hero on accident. I call that financial planning risk, right? So I think this is actually a very valid strategy, but I don't think it works for retirees as well emotionally is my only issue with it. But I've used strategies like this in my own practice. And then there's this other concept, to guarantee or not to guarantee. That is the question. And the thing about guarantees is when you make guarantees, you're typically giving up liquidity, meaning you're going to kind of lock it in with some type of structure. And I think this is an emotional question you have to ask yourself. Do you want to have what we call a statistical guarantee that this should work out just fine over the long term? And that's what, let's say, a target date fund does. But it's not an actual guarantee. It's trying to use statistics, which never describes the individual. Do you want to literally know that when you look in the account every day, it did not go down in value? That's typically a CD or a money market fund or potentially certain types of annuities, things like that. But think about that, just that behavioral finance question. Do you want to see your money, portions of your money, not go down in value? I think there are good reasons to do it on both sides of this. So I actually don't have a big dog in the hunt there. But I do recognize with my retirees, and I'm always trying to feel them out, kind of where they might land on this one, so that when I build a retirement plan, I know, okay, I need to have some structural guarantees in here or not. Because sometimes when things are going down 20%, even though it's to plan, everything's fine, being able to point to the small little bucket of money that didn't go down in value is all someone needs to sleep at night. So how do we tackle this in our practice, right? I've kind of alluded to some things, how we do things here. And I always suggest, try and copy some things we do. I think we do a good job of this. So what we try and do is we try and build a protection bucket out. And we're trying to build this across an entire financial plan so that your income is in line and you're hitting 5% across all your money. That includes savings accounts, everything, right? So, and that's the low end. That's what we want to hit. We actually mathematically are typically justifying a higher number. But if you really look behind the scenes, if I had to sleep at night, what would the number I need to hit? It's about 5% across all the numbers, right? And so what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to create a conservative bucket that meets my clients' emotional needs. It's meeting the math needs, and it's a part of a good overall financial plan. And remember, this is only supposed to be a component. I talked about this as the protection bucket. We talked about the income and growth buckets already. You're supposed to look at your own financial plan, your overall rates of return. Do you want to do this yourself? I showed you some good do-it-yourself options versus hire someone. Taxes. Taxes is one you're going to really want to watch out for. The protection bucket is famous for having passive taxation. And then, there's lots of other considerations. And that's why I'm out here. If you ever want to talk to someone about any of these subjects, feel free to contact us. At a minimum, I'm happy to just give you my opinion. Thank you.